Hey, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and I'm back for another round, comparing and contrasting the Robot Master designs from Mega Man Classic with their NetNavi adaptations from Battle Network, stating my preferred version as we go along. Note that this is purely from a design standpoint, not from a power one. The score thus far is Classic 14, BN 12, giving a slight edge to the previous games, with the bonus rounds for RMs without a Navi being 0 to 3 in the Navi's favor. Not that it'll matter much this time. Oddly enough, Dr. Cossack spots are the only set other than Mega Man 1's original 8 to have their full ranks get representation. Also of interest are how Dr. Light's robots tend to have more industrial purposes. Wily's are more combat focused, while Dr. Cossack's are tied pretty heavily into research. In fact, I'm a little worried about not being able to cover these guys as well as some of the others due to the scientific angle. I've never really studied toads, and it's been a while since I had my Egyptian mythology phase, but I'll still try to break things down as well as I can, though if I miss anything on this one, additional information is welcome. We're starting off with Brightman, who is very orange. Given that yellow is the color more associated with light, well, that or white, you might expect his main hue to be one of them, but then you look at his giant light bulb head and you realize that that has both of those covered, which might be why they went with a less obvious but still warm color. Besides that, he's got the standard RM boots and a pretty basic buster looking at it. I mean, it's not exactly like Rock's, his barrel sticks out more, whereas Brightman's just kinda stops at the end with a ring of ridged metal, but if you played these games enough, you can still tell what it is. He has a gray belt-like thing around his stomach, and black legs, which makes it a bit easier to tell his different parts apart. And of course he has the blue thing sticking out of his chest. Looks like it would emit a pleasant glow if it were to light up, but I'm not sure if it actually does that, and I imagine it's just there for something, with blue for contrast, since he would be pretty darn plain otherwise. In fact, I'd say outside of his light bulb, he is kind of a boring design, though looking closely, you can get a bit more of what they were going for. His face lacks a nose, but has kinda puffy cheeks, and while I wouldn't call him fat, his body is a bit rounder than most Robot Masters. Looking at his sprite, you can see his boots clearly, but barely any of his legs. And with his wide stance, he looks pretty squat. Part of this might just be because, as big as his bulb is, standing normally would make him too tall, but he still comes across as not really having an athletic build, which with his light bulb, which everything comes back to, makes him seem more intellectual. Light bulbs over the head symbolize ideas and flashes of inspiration, and large heads are often given to characters that are meant to be smart. So Brightman seems to be designed as someone who's neglected physical prowess to put it all into intelligence, which most could probably tell at a glance. Which brings us to Brightman.EXE, who... Holy crap, what the heck was that? Is this even Mega Man anymore, or did Sega stop by to drop off the newest Jet Set radio designs? I can't be the only one who sees it. This one departs a good deal from the Robot Master, being much smaller and slimmed down, having a lot more style, and keeping the orange, but now letting the yellow light from his bulb suffuse his bodysuit, with a lot of green thrown in. While the previous one used more traditional light, at least when it comes to the artificial types, this guy is more neon, green probably being the most stereotypically used for this style, or it could be more like those glow sticks, which we all used to love as children. You know, the ones you snap to activate. If it is the former though, that'd be funny because while I was looking up stuff on the original Brightman, the Robot Master field guide stated that he hates neon lights. This really does feel like a kid rebelling against his parents. He still does keep some of the blue in a few of his parts, which once again stand out against all the warmer colors. His gloves are white, giving them a nice clean look, while the black on his helmet makes you wonder whether the big green orbs, which could also serve as stand-ins for his previous bulb, are his eyes, or if that's actually some sort of visor, though I guess with him being made of data, you could say that eyes are optional. Then of course there are the tubes coming from his head, which could be seen as twin tails, tentacles, or just extendable arms to make up for the fact that he's on the smaller side. These end in plugs, which work for his electric element, and hey, gotta power all those lights somehow. Also a little weird are the extra bits behind his heels, which probably make it hard to walk, which would explain that shuffle. Maybe there's a deeper reason for it, or maybe it's just another example of this guy not following traditional design standards. All this gives him a very unique and rebellious style. I'm kinda meh on the Robot Master, but actually really like the Navi, so no surprise that I give it to Battle Network for this one. Toadman's our Airman type body this round, having his head built into his frame, no neck, and this works really well to give him Toad proportions, which is especially clear with how the official art has him crawling around on all fours. In fact, if you look at him, he almost seems like a guy hiding inside a Toad robot. What with the false eyes on top of his head, with what looks like lips lining the opening where his real peepers are. Toads can come in a variety of colors, so none of these really feel off, but green is the most obvious, especially given how toads are a type of frog, and more yellowish or orangish shades would probably be the next places I'd go. The orange and blacks in particular help to make his joints stand out. The white though, well, I did find pictures of white toads, but I think the more interesting connections are how his color scheme matches up pretty closely with Snake Man, the previous animal-themed RM with a predator-prey connection, and how rain is Toadman's big thing. You'd think, with the Toad's outdoor habitat and Toadman's sewer-themed level, that it'd be hard to keep white armor clean, but with his rain flush, he'd be able to wash away any mud or the like off. Or maybe it's all so that he can have a white tummy, which, come to think of it, doesn't seem all that weird. Though he's also got the yellow spot on that, and some stripes on his back, which is a nice little detail since some frogs do have markings. As for the Navi, he's a much more cartoony version of a frog. He has almost the exact same color scheme, yellow eyes, green armor, white belly, with some oranges and other yellows thrown in, with only the red cheeks being an addition. Though surprisingly they don't expand. And once again, he looks like a guy wearing a costume, though with much more childlike proportions. While the original had the standard Robot Master boots and gloves, EXE's feet have actual toes that look on the verge of becoming flippers, and his hands are big round discs, with 3 small round discs that look good for treading water. His false eyes have rectangular indents for pupils, making them seem even more mechanical since they almost look like you could use a flathead screwdriver on them. Whereas his face is black, probably so that it might look like an open maw from a distance, with a very simple face, wide eyes with no irises, and not really any details for his mouth. The black also makes his face look kind of like a speaker when he opens his mouth to sing at you, at least in Battle Network 2. And he's just so cute. Seriously, I know he's supposed to appear mechanical, but he just looks like he's begging to be made into a plush, and I'm kind of upset that I don't have one. His dumb little expressions remind me of a Serbot. It definitely feels like they were trying to bring in a new audience compared to how cool so many of the other characters in both series look. Toadman has a lot of cool details that I really like, and I think he's a strong design, but I just can't resist his Navi little brother, so Battle Network gets another point. I knew I had to do this at some point, so... It's Drillman. Why does this guy exist? He's just Crashman but less interesting. Both have drill hands that can launch drill bombs, only instead of a face with what looks like some sort of protective windshield over it, they just slapped another drill on his head. They even stole the green chest crystal. He's got some lined yellow bits on his stomach and knees and arms, which is... something? And I guess he's a little more red than Crashman, though another RM in this line wears it better. He's also got the black bodysuit thing, which is fine, I think it looks good in most cases, but Crash's white really helped him stand out and gave him an Evel Knievel vibe. Drillman really is just a robot that they slapped 3 drills onto and called it a day. Drillman. He has drills. If I keep saying it, maybe the word will lose all meaning. With that incredibly low bar set, let's look over at... Was originally gonna do a fake vomiting bit here, but I think I'll go for audience retention instead, so... Sorry about that, but what is this? I thought Drillman had drills, this guy is even more that. He looks unfinished. Seriously, just a basic scrawny frame that threw a drill on its head and then kinda stubbed the rest of the torso. Then that wasn't enough, so they gave him drill hands. Then that wasn't enough, so they gave him drill feet. Then that wasn't enough, so they gave him one last drill, split it into 4 pieces, and pasted it on him. His main color, well, outside of the gray drills that make up 80% of his design, is a slightly reddish brown, which does look more like soil. He's still got the black bodysuit and random yellow lined bits. There's also some pink coming out of his wrist, which make him seem like he's got some sort of gnarly power source in there, which I like, though his pink eyes are just weird. just being pink on pink, and it makes it look like he's being mind controlled or going berserk, but I just really hate his design. It's the whole drill man has drills thing again, but turned up to 11, and rather than coming off as absurd or hyperbolic, I just think he looks gross. So Classic gets this one, though I really wish I didn't have to give it to either. Why couldn't it have been Crash? But it's fine, it's fine. Pharaoh Man's next, and I love this guy. He's a pharaoh, so he's got King Tut's headdress, the one from his sarcophagus. Granted, it's a little different, Tut's being gold and blue, whereas Pharaoh Man's is yellow and black, which distinguishes the two while still being really close, though it still contains the snake on the forehead, which was apparently a sign of rulers. He's got a mask on over his mouth, though it's broken up into 3 sections, making them look like mummy bandages. His chest piece has the triangular shoulder pads, which look sturdy and regal, appropriate for his status, or at least his name, and his main colors are yellow and white. This could be simply because those are the ones most associated with sand, the Egypt connection there being obvious, but the yellow could also be gold, once again going back to his kingly title, and the white could be a reference to the moon. After all, he runs on solar power, which might be why his left arm looks like a recolor of the Mega Buster, or given that a few of these guys seem to have them, maybe they were just attached in a hurry to make them combat ready per Wily's command. My point though, is that you enter his stage at night, which, the only source of solar light then would be that reflected off the moon, which Pharaoh Man would look really cool backlit against, thus another reason for the white armor. Someone's had to have drawn that, right? Then we get to the Navi equivalent, Pharaoh.EXE, and while I want to say that he looks like a sarcophagus, given how big those tend to be, it might be more accurate to compare him to a statue. He's mainly a yellowish color, reminiscent of sandstone, something you could make an effigy from, with also some blue stripes a similar shade to those of Tut's, including a few receding from his eyes, right where a headdress should be, while also coming off like a type of intimidating face paint. His arms are crossed in front of his chest, like you would expect from a mummy, and if you look closely, his hands and wrists look a bit weathered, like the rest of his body, while his arms are more shiny and new, with colors not seen on the rest of him, kinda like an ancient work salvaged that needed a few parts replaced to restore it to an approximation of its original form. That, the neat red slits cut into his neck that look almost glowing, and his Navi symbol tie him back into his more mechanical looking contemporaries. He also has a pair of wings behind him that might be referencing either Ra or Horus, important Egyptian gods associated with the sun and kingship, typically portrayed as a falcon or a man with a falcon head. Or maybe they're just there to explain why he's able to float around, but they certainly do make him seem otherworldly. These are another set of strong designs, and while a part of me wants to give it to the Navi, I kinda feel like he needs just a few more accessories or details to really pull the look together. Whereas the only complaint I have with the original is the underwhelming Buster, which is easy to ignore. He's practically perfect as is, so classic. Ringman mainly uses warm colors, red and yellow, though he's also got the white gloves and black bodysuit, plus a blue circle in the center of his chest, likely to add just a bit more color to him. Actually, come to think of it, he has a boomeranging weapon and the same color scheme as Quickman. Did they just want to redo a Quickman? Let's try to give him a little more credit than that. Red's a color often associated with Russia, which is where Dr. Cossack is from, which might also be one of the reasons some adaptations have him as one of the Doc's primary robots, and the yellow, while used for his knees and shoulders, are more noticeable on his rings, which gold rings are probably the most common form of jewelry, whether they have a gem attached or not. There's also something about him that makes me think of the circus, his helmet somehow reminding me of a red big top with the yellow ring standing in for a flag, his hoops looking like they could be used for tricks, like lion taming, and just his official art's dynamic pose making me think he could do some fancy acrobatics. My mind also goes to the brass rings found at carousels, and there is some overlap between circuses and carnivals. Or maybe I'm just assigning way too many attributes to him after being influenced by his stage's whimsical music and rainbow platforms, with a hippo thrown in just because. If we want to be a bit more objective, there's the stuff I already mentioned with the colors, and the fact that he's a goober with rings, to the point of beating you over the head with it. He has a small collection of them on his arms, maybe to stay on theme, maybe to make sure he doesn't run out of them, though given that they magically come back, that seems unlikely. He also has one on top of his head, looking like a bubble wand, and also reminds me of the little hole where you have to insert the hook to hang Christmas ornaments. But regardless, it does manage to draw the eye. I feel like there's more here that I'm just not getting, since I can think of no reason why his rings would fly back, unless he really is just New Quick Man. Moving on to the Navi, wow, that's a lot of colors. I'm reminded of Brightman.EXE with just how, well, bright they are. Also, this isn't Ringman.EXE, just simply Ring, his form in this world actually being a girl. And if anyone wants to argue that they aren't the same, come on, just look at her, plus her signature attack is Ring Rang. She's got the helmet with the ring around it, and the ring up top, like the original. Plus the twin tails are made out of rings. Here though, they're green because, I don't know. Her color scheme is just kind of all of them, looking like someone's filled their box of Crayola, which is quite the fashion statement. Speaking of, she's one of the Navis that looks the most dressed as a human. Her helmet looking like an actual helmet worn over her head, rather than a part of her. She has open sleeves, rather than a bodysuit, a prominent collar with what looks like an undershirt underneath, seams in her onesie, which widens as they open up at the ankles almost like bell bottoms, with hands that look more like mittens, a Navi symbol placed like it might be part of a zipper, and her pointed shoes looking like maybe the only part of her outfit a human wouldn't wear. But back to the colors. Sorry, having trouble organizing my thoughts because there's just so much here. It seems like the design is trying to use as many as possible. Mostly warm, with the blue being cool but still having a sky blue shade. That makes me think of spring. And the rings, while green, looking closer to yellow than the hue you'd typically think of when I mention the color. Even the pink is more of a magenta, giving her a very atypical color scheme, and one that feels full of life and energy. When I look at her, I also find myself reminded of the 70s, though that's before my time, so I can't fully explain why. Which is why I asked my mother. She agreed with the bell-bottoms bit, and also summed up Ring's color scheme as being funkadelic. And hey, who am I to argue? She also compared her clothes to the stage costume sometimes worn by Earth, Wind, and Fire, which, yeah. And a work friend of hers also compared one of Ring's poses to the one used for a Keep On Truckin' image that was popular back then. So Ring.EXE is from the 70s, or at least inspired by him. I like the Robot Master and feel like Ring's color palette should turn me off, but somehow, her more unique outfit that looks like the sort of thing that might actually exist, and the amount of energy she radiates has me siding with her on this one. Real shame she's banished to a side game that no one will probably ever play. Dustman is, I think he qualifies as an airman body type as well, but he also looks like he could have had a regular head at one point, but it was squashed down by that vent. And speaking of, we gotta talk about it. It's nice and rectangular, with a screw in each corner, making it look like it should be bolted into the wall. It's got kind of an accordion series of folds as it goes down his back, which is cute. He's also got a jaw which is flesh-colored, which might be to keep him kind of human-looking, even if it isn't a very human-looking chin, and a big, thick wire across his neck, which in some images appear like a bundle of wires tied together, so good cable management. I'm not sure if it makes him look neat, incomplete since they are exposed parts, or like it's holding him together, given the whole smushed down head thing. Even his shoulders stick up higher than his face. They do seem to be some of the bulkier ones we've seen. And he also has a buster, but at least his is kind of squarish, making it a bit more unique than the rest in this line. And I haven't even talked colors yet. Blue and white armor, with just a touch of red on his chest, and black for his legs, and I don't really see a reason for this other than they needed to color him something. He was made to clean and handle trash, so I would have mostly thought of silvers and grays, like his vent, wires, and Junkman a few games later. He's pretty much a vacuum, most of the ones I've seen being darker colors, like black or, again, gray. This has him overlapping with Mega Man, which is fine if it makes sense, like Rock's Walking Weakness Needleman or our next subject, Dive Man, and with it also being paired with white, I kind of also think of the Police. While I wouldn't say he could be any color, he could have at least been something else. It just seems like he's blue just cuz, which might be why his Net Navi equivalent is such a departure. He's got the black for his limbs, his head and some of his parts are more of a copperish hue, he's got some grays and silvers, and his little hair nubs are yellow, possibly gold, all of which are colors associated with metal. He also has a few green parts, which go well with the other shades selected. And are you really gonna deny the guy just a bit of paint for flair? He looks super industrial, his chest being both a vacuum and compactor, and looks very manufactured, having that curve but also a lot of edges. His head is just barely sliding out of the top, with a very square row of teeth and 2 grooves on either side. Like they might be there to attach to some extra piece of equipment or even lock him into a bigger machine. Likewise, his feet are perfectly round, which seems like they'd be bad for balance, but could maybe be snapped into something instead, because once again, grooves. His hands though, I'm a little confused on. One has 4 spikes in a hole, the other 4 holes in a spike, and obviously fit into each other. I'm just not sure for what purpose. Is this to punch holes in steel or something, and if so, what sort of object would need that set of punctures for what sort of purpose? In-game, he does use it to smash trash he doesn't want to recycle, so maybe it's just a more interesting or even effective method of crushing garbage than just 2 flat presses would be. Though I still can't help but wonder if there's maybe a more specific reason for it. While he does confuse me, I think I'm still gonna give it to him, because if I'm gonna be left wondering why, I'd rather it be because there's a deeper reason there, as opposed to just suspecting it's because they couldn't think of anything more clever. Next is Dive Man, and what am I even looking at? He's just a robot with blue armor and... ooh. I'm kidding, of course. He's got the periscope and fins on his head, as well as a pair on the sides of his legs, but that he's meant to be a submarine is most obvious when he charges you. After all, who's ever seen one of those standing up? You could also compare him to a torpedo with how fast he moves, which also works given what his weapon is. His primary color is dark blue, which is suitable for an aquatic robot master, though he's also got the typical black arms and leg sections. He's also got some white for his hands, feet, and gut, which could be a reference to the typical color of a Navy officer's uniform, or just to make it so that it wouldn't be too hard to spot him on a dark background. He's got a yellow something as well, which is probably just an extra mechanical looking detail to remind you that he's a robot. He's also got a red symbol on his chest, which kind of reminds me of a cross between the male and female symbols, or a kunai, but if we interpret it as an anchor or maybe even an arrow on a map, I think it would make more sense. Regardless, given the typical chest gems, this makes me think either of a symbol used to mark a ship, or maybe even an emblem embroidered into a military uniform. Whether he's more meant for underwater research or war though, he's definitely a man of the sea. It's a bit harder to pin down his doppelganger's appearance, because he spends so much of his time submerged. But luckily, we have official art. He's still a submarine, though at a more conventional angle this time. He's still got the periscope and fins, though this time it's a bit more obvious that his head's supposed to be a sub's hatch. He also keeps the arms and leg fins, with his colors largely staying the same, just a few lighter blue patches thrown in, as well as the big yellow circle on the front. It certainly makes him stand out more, but how are you gonna sneak up on someone like that? His feet also appear to be turbines, one coming out of his back as well, and he also has little openings around his gauntlets, possibly to fire out torpedoes, which is a nice detail. There's a few squares on his upper chest that could also be hatches to attack with. And of course he's got a little pipe. Maybe it has a practical reason, like it's meant to vent steam or whatever energy source he's got, but it makes me think of a salty old seaman. Possibly even Popeye the Sailor Man specifically. While he might rely mostly on missiles, he does have some kind of large forearms, especially compared to the rest of the limb. And he does toss huge waves of water your way. As for how they stack up, I like how the original uses his whole body to evoke the image of a submarine, and I think the yellow front is kind of unnecessary for EXE, but the Navi has a lot of fun details like the turbine and pipe, so I'm gonna give another point to Battle Network. Skullman is a skeleton-themed robot that, oddly enough, was not made by Dr. Wily, though given his designation as the last of the Cossack numbers this round, I have read that it was made specifically for combat due to Wily's demands, so maybe he had some input on the design. And what can I say, he's Skullman. His helmet is reminiscent of a skull, white with the odd little hole that remains when the nose rots away, and slits cut out of the bottom that make it look like he has teeth, not to mention the slightly grayer skull symbol on his forehead. He has skull shoulder pads, and his chest armor has lines cut into it that make them look like ribs, with his back having a spinal column. He's mostly white, because bones, though he also has a good bit of black since what would pair better, and it makes the holes in his armor look shadowed. He's got some red here and there like his chest jewel, which could be to symbolize the blood that he no longer has, and also comes off as aggressive, good for a combat unit. He's got those segmented yellow patches like Drillman, which I'd rather ignore, but maybe the similarity's there to mark him as one of Cossack's. His skull barrier comes out looking like little white cereal marshmallows in-game, but official art has them as more blue and warped, making me think of a will-o-wisp, keeping him spooky. For his main offensive weapon though, it's another recolored buster, which feels a little lame. You'd think battle prowess would mean a unique weapon. Fight fire with fire, I guess, though I get why some other adaptations like Megamix change up his arsenal some. His Navi, who oddly enough is not associated with the WWW, is a lot taller and lankier, his trademark skull being comically elongated, with exaggerated teeth and two vertebrae coming out of his neck long as knives. While he's still got the skull pauldrons and chest ribs, and is mostly white and black, he manages to be more colorful. He has the red around his Navi symbol ears and collar, also his hips and shoes, which, if we think of it as blood again, could make me wonder if he's supposed to look like he just walked through gore. After all, while his flesh might have rotted away, that doesn't mean the same for his opponents. Orange replaces yellow, being used for his legs, arms, and neck, and given that he sends out his arms to stalk you around the battlefield and launches his skull, which grows to crush you from his neck, this might be to highlight his most deadly attributes. I mean, while he might not use his legs to attack, he certainly looks like he could deliver some deadly kicks. He also has a bit of black around his eyes, making him look like he has bags under them, which is sometimes given to undead creatures, probably to highlight how unhealthy their skin is, ironic here, and because I mentioned it with his predecessor, he can also spew blue, ghostly flames from his mouth. I like both of these guys. The Robot Master is kind of edgy and comes across as someone trying to look tough, possibly a biker or haunted house attendant, but EXE, with his skull not being just a helmet, and the stretched out proportions, no excess flesh attached, looks creepy, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him dig himself out of the ground in a strangely disturbing children's cartoon. So he takes this easy. He's in my top 10 Navis for a reason. Dr. Cossack wears a lab coat, partially buttoned up, a green tie, and yellow dress shirt underneath. He also has brown slacks and brown shoes, but two different shades. He has brown hair, mustache, and beard, though not as full of a one as Light, and glasses with green eyes. And yeah, he's just kind of a scientist. Dr. Light looks like Santa Claus and Wily looks like a crazy Einstein, but I'm not sure if Cossack is patterned after anyone. He just kinda looks like a guy, which is fine. I will say that in some depictions, his head looks a little weird, like it's too wide and flat at the top, which could be to make him look smart, another bright man big brain, or maybe kinda like Frankenstein's monster, which is kinda sci-fi, just horror sci-fi, or maybe he just styles his hair weird. But that might be the most notable thing about him, other than being a bit younger than the other two scientists in the series. Then you get Battle Network Cossack, but now he's blonde, taller, and more of a sharp dresser. His glasses have smaller lenses and thinner frames, looking a bit more stylish, and his hair is a bit spikier and more anime. While I wouldn't normally pick pea green as an outfit color, it does work really well with his yellow hair, while his brown vest and barely present dark red tie with yellow collar prevent things from looking too monotonous. He looks a bit more like he's dressed to attend a business meeting, or maybe even to just go out, making his identity a bit more obscure, rather than just slap you in the face with what he does for a living. And I don't want to turn this into a smash or pass or anything, but he is kind of hot. I mean, not that I'm into guys, I'm just being objective. Now, with that said, who do you think I'm going with? Oh golly gee, it's Battle Network. So my total this time is Classic 2, Battle Network 7, for a grand total of 16 to 19. The Net Navis really took this one, giving them a bit of a lead overall, especially if you count the 3 bonus points I gave them previously. Not that that was relevant this time. Cossack really isn't pulling his weight as much as his contemporaries are. I was kinda surprised by just how many of these guys had what looked like painted Mega Busters, which isn't exclusive to this line, just as Bubble and Snake, but I still found it somewhat disappointing even if I do like some of the offenders. That design choice though might just be indicative of how quickly some of them were converted for combat. Also feels like I might be missing some of the significance for some of the details on the Robot Masters, which might have hurt their chances in my eyes, or maybe we should just look at it as there being some really strong Navi redesigns. In either case, I definitely had a strong preference this time, but what about you? Which version do you prefer for each pair, and what are your tallies looking like? Been a bit since the last one of these, which is mostly Dustman's fault. 12 games are a lot to get through, and I maybe lost steam after the 10th one. Also, it feels a little weird not to have Eddie or Kalinka here, but neither of them have a Battle Network equivalent to my knowledge, and trying to find someone similar enough for a bonus round felt kinda forced, but maybe I'll double back sometime down the line. Or maybe the Legacy collections did well enough that we'll get a BN7 with them in, but for now, that'll do it. So thanks for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into retro games, especially Mega Man. Oh no, I need to go back to Battle Network 4 for Windman!